Okay, Robotaxi, take me to Tesco's and don't spare the horses.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Oh yeah, seatbelt. All right. Yep. What's the problem?
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
It's because of my Kiwi accent, isn't it? If in a dramatic twist, Tesla managed to awaken its fleet one night and turn millions of their EVs into AV robotaxis, putting hundreds of thousands of people out of work around the world, you'd have to ask, is that ethical? If the technology was, in a less dramatic way, still able to put hundreds of thousands out of work over the course of 3 to 4 years, what responsibility should society take to help those people retrain? Should the companies that profit from innovation be responsible? If so, how? Bill Gates' robot tax? I doubt it. In the last video, I did my best to explain where self-driving technology is right now and why this time we really ought to believe the hype. Although it's not going to change things in the next couple of weeks, it is likely that all new vehicles will at least have the hardware and software ability to drive autonomously before the end of the decade. Quite likely even sooner. How much they use it should depend on an informed public making wise choices. Insert cynical comments here. Anyway, in this video, I want to explore more of the quite large implications of this technology and why it's a conversation we should be getting familiar with. The easiest way to understand the issue, given the mixed signals you get from various studies, is to break the argument into two possible scenarios. This is not to conveniently get me out of making a prediction, I'm happy to do that later, but whether this development is good or bad depends a lot on who you ask and who it's expected to benefit. For instance, one highly ranked report I discovered had researched the sector and come to the conclusion that drivers won't be affected much, if at all, by the technology. Instead, drivers will always be needed and it would simply make their lives easier. And then you get to the bottom and you discover that the report was commissioned and paid for by Waymo and Toyota. So a lot of reports and studies have to be taken with a pinch of salt. So rather than pretend there is a clearly defined truth about what will happen, let's break the information down into the good news story versus the bad news story. And spoiler alert, I do lean towards the good news story because I'm an optimist. From now on, I'll shorten all mentions of self-driving to AV or autonomous vehicles and regular vehicles as MDVs or manually driven vehicles. Now, of course, whenever someone says, do you want the good news or the bad news? You always say the bad news first, right? 1. Job losses. In an advanced economy, transport and logistics employs a lot of people, and in the UK and beyond, employment in trucking, rail and taxis will be decimated. Remember, this is the bad news story only. It's not actually what I believe will happen, but it's a picture of the worst case scenario that needs to be avoided. In the US, where truck driving is one of the most common occupations, the social impact could be massive. That's certainly the white noise and the instinctive result you would expect from the introduction of AV technology. But this part of the bad news story can't just be presented at face value, at least not in the UK. The problem in the UK right now is actually from a severe shortage of drivers, an estimated 80,000. Driver training companies can't get enough people through the tests to keep up with demand. If anything, automation will help the sector grow and employ more people in support roles. But would it be good advice for someone currently unemployed to get a HGV license and start trucking? Maybe, but that demand could be temporary. If anything, the push factor of driver shortages in the UK could speed up deployment of the technology that comes before AVs, teleoperation. With the rollout of ever more robust mobile infrastructure, it becomes attractive for trucks to be driven remotely from a control centre, a system that companies like Waymo already use to enable human drivers to take over remotely when the vehicle encounters a tricky situation that it can't navigate. The same is true for local deliveries using small robots like the KiwiBot in Berkeley in the US and Starship in Milton Keynes here in the UK. The advantage is in automating a lot of the driving process and then having the remote driver take over at critical points or where needed. That means one operator can remotely manage a number of vehicles. For a haulage company, that could mean having the driver remotely control a truck onto the highway where, due to the more controlled situation, it may legally drive autonomously for several hours to a highway exit where the remote driver will take over again. In the meantime, the remote driver will be free to work with other vehicles. The labour cost saved in doing this at scale will make the initial investment attractive. Filling a driver shortage that is holding back growth will be a tempting reason for governments to speed up the licensing and safety protocols that would be needed in such a scenario. After the initial shortfall is made up through teleoperation, the need for drivers could plummet unless they take a drop in pay to remain competitive. History has plenty of examples of automation being rolled back when labour just got cheap enough. Just look at the recent return of while you wait hand-washed car services in the UK compared to 20 years ago when the only offering was a machine or do-it-yourself jet wash. A labour price race against automation is one that people could win, but it's not much of a victory. And all that is before proper AVs enter the mainstream of driving point to point with no human assistance on board at all, but probably not until the late 2020s. Still, that's hundreds of thousands of jobs in trucking alone, and they may well be replaced by other jobs in the automation sector, but not by the same people who just drove a truck for the last time. 2. Public spending. For example, from a speed awareness course I did, I know that where there is no signage for the speed limit, you must assume it is 30 miles per hour if you're in a built-up area and there are street lamps overhead. That's a little too abstract for my Model 3, which gets the speed limit wrong all the time. AVs will need consistent signage everywhere and/or up to the second mapping services. They may well need their own lanes on highways for legal reasons too. These are just some of the examples where public spending will need to be increased on roads in the short to medium term. 3. Driverless taxis. A future where most taxis are totally driverless is at best 15 years away, but you only need to apply the above business model of truck teleoperator to Uber and you would decimate the jobs in taxi driving. A level of automation that allows one teleoperator to manage 5 cars, only taking over when needed or requested, which is pretty much what Waymo is already doing on a smaller scale, and you would make jobs scarce in that sector. I'm not going to speculate on Tesla's Robotaxis because it's super ambitious, and even if they could do an over-the-air update today and make their fleet awaken into a flawless, full self-driving robotaxi, there would be quite a lot of public perception and legal hurdles for them to get over. They may well do it, and good luck to them, but there's plenty of disruption that's very likely without speculating on when Tesla might or might not join the taxi industry. So that's everything in the bad news story. I was going to include a bit more about how AV electric trucking could well destroy rail in the US, but by now I think you'll probably have had enough of this side of the argument. On to the good news story. 1. Less vehicles. If in the longer run, electric AV taxis or even autonomous with teleoperated assisted taxis become viable at much lower rates per mile than traditional taxis, no driver, no labour costs, then congestion charging could conceivably be increased for old-fashioned MDVs. Remember, that's manually driven vehicles, to further de-incentivise the ownership of cars. Why would that be attractive? In the burbs, most people are likely to keep their cars for a while longer, but in busy cities, cars are an expensive option once you include the additional real estate needed for car parking and the lost time in finding a park rather than being dropped off at your destination. On average, we currently use our cars about 5% of the time. The other 95%, they are parked, whether that's at home or elsewhere, clogging up our streets and filling acres of real estate for multi-level car parking. Utilising AV taxis to the full could give people the choice to step away from the cost of car ownership, freeing up curb space in cities and allowing car parks to be reclaimed for other uses. At its most optimistic, some think this could mean only needing 50% of the number of cars we currently use. 2. Less roads. Despite the immediate need for upgrades to accommodate AVs, road infrastructure over the longer term could cost a lot less. If there's less cars on the road, traditional costs associated with an ever-increasing volume of traffic, such as widening highways and additional bypasses, will be needed less. Less road building, less cost. As an aside, I should point out this gain could be offset if the cost of a freight ton does fall below rail, as predicted by ARK Invest. That would mean a lot of rail traffic suddenly spilling over onto roads, but that's still uncertain. 3. More access. If you can't hold a license due to age, medical or disability reasons, AVs make travel a lot less of an odyssey. Although public transport is a lot better than nothing, it does require more planning and time than just going point to point with an AV. It also restricts where you live if you have to live near a rail or bus station. I think of my dad, whose stroke has resulted in partial vision loss, enough to revoke his driving license. The loss of independence for the older generation would be a lot easier to bear if AVs were an option in addition to public transport. 4. More time. Whether you are on the road for personal or work reasons, driving should and does take up a lot of brain space. Freeing drivers to get to their destination without driving will mean more time to do other tasks like continuing with work or just relaxing and arriving fresher than before. Across an entire economy full of people needing to get from A to B, this is a giant productivity gain. 5. Safer roads. This is one that at this stage falls into the realm of speculation. There's plenty of studies that suggest automated driving will be statistically safer by a lot. Those studies might turn out to be correct when most cars on the road are automated. It may turn out that humans have been the weak link all along, but I don't think we'll know this for sure until a large number of fully autonomous vehicles are driving around full time. Yes, that makes us guinea pigs, like we were the guinea pigs before cars had seatbelts too. What makes the studies a little bit presumptuous is that they assume, because more than 90% of serious accidents are caused by human error, that removing human error will mean that serious accidents occur 90% less. Considering there's more than 16,000 deaths on the road in the UK alone, 90% would be a big deal. But it also assumes that autonomous vehicles don't make any mistakes, which just isn't clear yet. Like I said earlier, I come down on the good news side of this one, but in the past, we've just shrugged and figured that job losses in manufacturing, for example, were, part of the game. Well, if the hollowing out of wealth in small town USA and the UK is anything to go by, that was a pretty short-sighted idea. We could just let the market decide as we have done in the past and let displaced drivers work it out for themselves, though that assumes a level of personal reinvention that not everyone has, no matter how many Tony Robbins books they read, and this would be happening rather quickly. I think if we're to accept that accelerated innovation has enough benefits for society as a whole, then we should also accept a responsibility to look after people who are left behind by it. I know that lofty sentiment is complex to put into practice, but should it guide how we approach things like automated transport? Let me know in the comments your thoughts on where this is all going, and make sure you smash that like button and hit subscribe because I explore something new every week. And remember, the future is the only place we're all heading at the same time. May as well make it good.